The last number I dialed called me back. That sentence doesn't make sense, I know. It's a paradox, a glitch in logic. But it happened. I was living alone for the first time in a cramped, third-floor apartment in a part of the city that was always shrouded in a low-hanging mist from the nearby industrial sector. The building was old, a brick monolith with plumbing that groaned like a dying beast and floors that held the memories of every footstep ever taken upon them. It was cheap, and it was mine, but it never truly felt like home. It felt temporary. A waiting room. That night, a storm was brewing. Not just rain, but a full-throated electrical tantrum that had been threatening all day. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of ozone and wet asphalt. I've always hated storms. They make the world feel fragile, like the sky could crack open and swallow everything whole. To distract myself, I called Sarah. We'd been best friends since we were kids, and our phone calls were a ritual, a familiar comfort against the anxieties of the world. We talked for hours, our voices a small pocket of warmth against the growing symphony of the storm. Remember that old wives' tale your grandma used to tell us? Sarah's voice crackled slightly through the speaker. That thunder was the sound of the devil beating his wife. I forced a laugh, pulling a blanket tighter around my shoulders. God, yes. She was convinced. She'd make us hide all the mirrors in the house so the lightning wouldn't get trapped inside. We were so scared of everything back then, she said, her tone nostalgic. Now it's just bills and deadlines, and storms that sound like the world is ending. I added, flinching as a particularly violent crack of thunder rattled my window pane. The lights flickered, a brief, nauseating dip into darkness before they stuttered back to life. My heart hammered in my chest. We talked for another hour, the conversation drifting as we both grew sleepier. The storm outside reaching its crescendo. The rain was a solid wall of sound, a relentless, furious drumming against the roof and glass. It wasn't cleansing, it felt angry. Around 2:45 a.m., Sarah's voice was thick with sleep. Okay, I'm about to pass out. This storm is giving me the creeps. Me too. I admitted, the lie tasting bitter. The creeps had started hours ago. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck. The kind you get when you feel eyes on you in an empty room. Sleep well. Call me if the power goes out for good. You too. Don't let the devil get you. She joked, but it didn't land right. We hung up. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was horrifying. It was absolute, a heavy blanket pressed down on me, making the roar of the storm seem even louder, more personal. The apartment, my small sanctuary, suddenly felt vast and full of dark corners. I did my nightly ritual, checked the deadbolt on the front door, slid the chain across. I went to my single, large window and checked the lock, my fingers tracing the cold metal. It was an old, rattling sash window that overlooked a dark alleyway. I always felt exposed there, even on the third floor. I got into bed, the sheets feeling cold and clammy. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. My own breathing sounded loud and ragged in the quiet. Every creak of the old building was amplified. Every groan of the pipes a moan from something trapped within the walls. I kept thinking I heard a soft tapping sound, rhythmic and faint, from the direction of the window. Just a branch in the wind, I told myself, even though there were no trees in the alley. Just the rain. Exhaustion finally claimed me, pulling me under into a shallow, dreamless sleep. I woke up with a gasp. The room was pitch black and utterly silent. The storm had passed. The sudden absence of noise was more jarring than the storm itself. My heart was pounding, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. What woke me up? There was no sound, no light. Just a profound, suffocating stillness. My digital clock on the nightstand glowed with stark red numbers, 3:15 a.m. The witching hour. I shivered, a coldness seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had the distinct, terrifying feeling that I was not alone. I held my breath, listening, straining my ears for any sound at all. Nothing. And then, I felt it. A faint vibration against the wood of my nightstand. My phone. My first thought was that it was Sarah, that her power had gone out. But it wasn't ringing. It was just vibrating. A single short buzz. Then another, and another. A strange, stuttering rhythm. My hand trembled as I reached for it in the dark. My fingers fumbled against the smooth, cold glass. I pressed the side button, and the screen flared to life, blinding me for a second. It was the missed call log. My blood turned to ice. At 3:17 a.m., 2 minutes from now, according to my clock, which must have been a little slow, there was a missed call from an unknown number. But that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. That wasn't what made a low, guttural sound of fear escape my lips. Directly above it, in my outgoing call history, was a call placed at 3:15 a.m., The exact moment I had woken up, the call was made to the very same, unknown number that had just tried to call me back. It was impossible. I was asleep. My phone was locked. It had been sitting on the nightstand, untouched. I hadn't made any call. I would never, ever call a number I didn't recognize, especially not in the middle of the night. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A technical glitch, sleep dialing. But my phone required a passcode. I hadn't touched it. I knew I hadn't. A wave of pure, primal fear washed over me. This wasn't a glitch. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. My apartment, which had felt empty and large, now felt claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in. Against every single screaming instinct in my body, I did the stupidest thing I have ever done. My finger hovered over the number in the missed call log. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Don't do it. Just turn the phone off. Go back to sleep. But I couldn't. I had to know. I pressed the call button. It rang once, the sound piercing the dead silence of my room. It rang twice. On the third ring, someone picked up. There was no hello. There was only static. A thick, hissing sound like a radio tuned between stations. And underneath the static, something else. A low, wet, guttural sound. A clicking, chittering noise, like insects scrabbling over wet leaves. Hello, I whispered, my voice a dry croak. The clicking stopped. The static seemed to thin, just for a moment. And in that brief pocket of clarity, a voice whispered back. It was faint, distorted, like it was being spoken through water or from a great, great distance. It was a voice made of dry leaves and cracking bones. And it whispered my name. The line went dead. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a solid lump of ice. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and clattered to the floor. I scrambled off the bed, backing away from the nightstand, my eyes wide in the darkness, searching for a thread I couldn't see. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the floor in the farthest corner of my living room, my back pressed against the cold wall, clutching a heavy kitchen knife I'd retrieved with shaking hands. I watched the shadows, certain that every one of them held a shape, a form that wasn't there before. The next morning, after the sun had risen and burned away the last of the oppressive darkness, I forced myself to retrieve my phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I went to the call log, my hand still unsteady. There was no record of the outgoing call at 3:15 a.m., no record of the incoming call at 3:17 a.m. They were gone. It was as if it had never happened. But I know it did. I changed my number the next day. I broke my lease and moved out of that apartment a month later, even though it cost me nearly all my savings. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had crossed over through that phone call, that it had my name, and it knew where I lived. Sometimes, even now, years later, I'll wake up in the middle of the night. The clock will read 3:15 a.m., and in the silence of my room, I'll swear I can hear a faint, stuttering vibration coming from my phone, even when it's turned completely off. At 3:14 a.m., a man walked past. His face didn't move. That's the part I can't get out of my head. The part that replays itself in the quiet moments before I fall asleep. A perfect, chilling loop of memory. For about 6 months, insomnia had claimed me as its own. It wasn't the gentle, drifting kind of sleeplessness. It was a frantic, wide-eyed state of anxiety, where my body was a leaden weight of exhaustion, but my mind was a racetrack of circling, catastrophic thoughts. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, my heart thumping with a nameless dread, replaying every mistake I'd ever made, worrying about a future that felt both terrifying and impossibly distant. My doctor said it was stress. He prescribed pills that made me feel like a zombie and breathing exercises that only made me more aware of the frantic rhythm of my own heart. Nothing worked. So, I started driving. When the walls of my small suburban house started to feel like they were shrinking, when the silence of the night became too loud, I would grab my keys and just drive. The act of moving, of seeing the world slide past my windows, was the only thing that seemed to quiet the noise in my head. The empty streets of my town at 2 or 3 in the morning were a strange comfort. The world was asleep, and for a little while, I could pretend I was just an observer, disconnected from all the things that kept me awake. On this particular night, the insomnia was especially vicious. I gave up on sleep around 2 a.m., the sheets of my bed tangled around me like a shroud. I slipped out of my house, the click of the door sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. I got into my car and just started driving, no destination in mind. The town was a ghost of itself. Traffic lights blinked yellow into empty intersections. The neat rows of houses were dark. their occupants lost in dreams I couldn't find. I drove for what felt like an hour, the hypnotic rhythm of the road starting to finally soothe the sharp edges of my anxiety. I ended up parked on Hemlock Street, a place I barely knew, a few miles from my own neighborhood. It was the epitome of suburban placidity, identical two-story homes with manicured lawns and basketball hoops in the driveways. A street so normal, it was almost unsettling. I killed the engine, and the silence that descended was absolute. I leaned my seat back, pulling out my phone to mindlessly scroll, hoping the blue light would finally tire my eyes out. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed in my hand, the vibration sharp and violent in the quiet car. An incoming call. The number was local, but I didn't recognize the sequence. My first thought was that it was an emergency, maybe one of my parents. I answered, my voice thick with sleep I hadn't earned. Hello. Silence. Not the silence of a dropped call, but a heavy, listening silence. I could hear the faint, ambient hiss of an open line, a sound that told me someone was there. They just weren't speaking. Hello? Is anyone there? I asked again, a prickle of irritation mixing with a growing unease. Still nothing. I held the phone to my ear for another 10 seconds, the silence feeling more and more like a deliberate act, a form of communication in itself. Finally, unnerved, I hung up. A wrong number, I told myself. A pocket dial. It happens. I tried to go back to scrolling, but my focus was gone. My eyes kept darting up from the phone screen, scanning the dark, sleeping houses across the street. The feeling of being the sole observer had vanished. Now, I felt watched. At 3:13 a.m., exactly 1 minute later, the phone rang again. The same number. My heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. This was no accident. I answered, my grip on the phone suddenly tight. I didn't say anything this time. I just listened. The same heavy silence greeted me. That same faint hiss of an open connection. I waited, my breath held. And then, I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it, a sound that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Click, click, click. It was a rhythmic, delicate sound, like someone slowly, deliberately tapping a fingernail against a hard surface, maybe a desk, or a window pane, or a phone. It was methodical, unhurried, and utterly chilling. It went on for what felt like an eternity, a tiny, maddening metronome counting down to something I couldn't comprehend. I felt a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a prank. This felt different. This felt wrong. I slammed the end call button, my hand trembling. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat as if it were contaminated. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. My bubble of peaceful isolation had been violently popped. I locked my car doors. The click of the locks was deafening. I looked up, my eyes scanning the street, the houses, the dark spaces between the streetlights, searching for an explanation. That's when I saw him. He emerged from the deep shadows between two of the houses across the street. A tall, slender man, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the dim light. He stepped onto the sidewalk and began to walk, his direction taking him right past my parked car. There was something profoundly wrong with the way he moved. It wasn't a natural walk. He glided. His feet seemed to barely touch the pavement, his body held in a rigid, unnatural posture. There was no sway to his arms, no bounce in his step, just a smooth, inexorable forward motion, like a figure on a conveyor belt. He was looking directly at me. Even from across the street, in the patchy, weak glow of the streetlights, I could feel his gaze lock onto my car. As he drew closer, my fear curdled into something pure and cold. It was his face. Or rather, the lack of what a face should do. It was completely, utterly still. His eyes were wide, dark pools in a pale face, and they were fixed on me. But there was no other movement. No blink. No twitch of a muscle. No subtle shift of expression. His mouth was a neutral line. His brow was smooth. It was like a mannequin's face, a mask of flesh that had been frozen in a single, vacant expression of passive observation. He walked past my car, his head slowly turning to keep his unblinking gaze fixed on me. The movement was unnervingly smooth, like a security camera panning. The silence in my car was a roaring pressure in my ears. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. I could see him so clearly now, just a few feet away through my driver's side window. The streetlight caught his features, and I saw that there were no lines on his face, no laugh lines, no worry lines. It was a blank, perfect, terrifying canvas. He passed my car and continued his slow, gliding walk down the sidewalk, never once looking away until the angle became impossible. He didn't turn around. He just glided on, down the street, until he was swallowed by the darkness at the far end of the block. I sat there for a full minute, maybe more, my entire body rigid. My mind was screaming. What was that? My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a vicious, angry sound that made me jolt so hard I hit my head on the steering wheel. It was the same number, 3:14 a.m. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at the glowing screen, at the number that was now burned into my brain. The phone continued to ring, a shrill, insistent demand in the crushing silence. Finally, the fight or flight response kicked in. I fumbled for the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into drive, peeling away from the curb with a squeal of tires that felt obscene in the dead quiet of Hemlock Street. I drove home at a speed that was far from safe, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that blank, unmoving face staring back at me from the empty back seat. I never got another call from that number. I never drove at night again. But I can't forget him. I see that face sometimes in crowds, a fleeting glimpse of impossible stillness that makes my blood run cold. And I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had answered that third call. What would I have heard? What would he have done? If I'd locked my window properly, I wouldn't be telling this story. I'd be sleeping peacefully, ignorant. But I didn't. And because of that one tiny mistake, I learned what true, helpless fear feels like. I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle for a month, while they were on their dream trip to Italy. Their home wasn't just a house. It was an old farmhouse, a 2-story stone and timber building that had stood for over a century, surrounded by acres of rolling fields and dense, dark woods. The nearest neighbor was a mile down a winding, gravel road. It was the kind of isolation that could be either peaceful or terrifying, depending on your state of mind. For the first week, it was peaceful. I loved the solitude. I spent my days reading on the porch swing and my evenings curled up by the enormous stone fireplace with their 2 cats, a lazy orange tabby named Marmalade, and a sleek black cat named Shadow. The house had its own language, the groan of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind in the eaves, the shudder of the pipes when the water was running. I learned its rhythms and felt safe within its thick, sturdy walls. The unease began subtly, as a whisper at the edge of my hearing. It started with the feeling of being watched when I was outside. I'd be walking the property line, and the woods at the edge of the fields would seem to grow darker, the silence within them deeper. I'd get a prickling sensation on my neck and turn around quickly, only to see nothing but swaying trees. I dismissed it as city kid paranoia, my mind not yet accustomed to the vast, empty spaces. Then, things started happening inside the house. I'd leave a room and come back to find a book I'd been reading lying on the floor. The cats, I told myself. I'd hear a soft thud from upstairs when I was downstairs, and vice versa. The old house settling I'd rationalize. But a persistent, cold knot of anxiety was beginning to form in my gut. The house's familiar language was starting to sound like a warning. The first phone call came on a Tuesday night. It was late, close to 11. I was in the living room, the cats purring at my feet, watching some mindless sitcom on TV. The landline on the end table, a heavy, old-fashioned thing, jangled loudly, making me jump. My cell phone got no service out there, so this was my only connection to the outside world. I picked it up. The caller ID was blank. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding small in the quiet room. There was a long pause, filled with a faint, crackling static. I was about to hang up when a voice finally spoke. It was a man's voice, but it was strained, raspy, and quiet, like he was trying to speak without being overheard. It sounded like he was whispering through a throat full of gravel. "Is someone there?" he rasped. "Yes, I'm here." "Who is this?" My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat. Another long, agonizing pause. The static hissed. Then, the voice came again, this time with a chilling, desperate urgency. "You need to lock your doors." The line went dead with a decisive click. I stood there, receiver in hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. It had to be a prank call. Some local kids messing around. But the voice, it hadn't sounded like a joke. It had sounded terrified. Shaking, I did as he said. I went to the heavy oak front door and slid the deadbolt home. I did the same with the back door off the kitchen. I walked through the entire ground floor, checking the locks on every single window, my reflection a pale, worried ghost in the dark glass. Everything was secure. I felt foolish, but the knot in my stomach had tightened into a solid ball of ice. I tried to go back to my show, but the ladder from the TV sounded hollow and fake. Every creak of the house was now a footstep. Every gust of wind was a hand rattling the doorknob. 2 hours later, just after 1 a.m., the phone rang again. I stared at it, my body frozen. It shrieked in the silence, a summons from the dark. After the fourth ring, I snatched it up, my fear making me angry. "Who is this? What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The same raspy, whispering voice answered, even quieter this time, so faint I could barely hear it over my own frantic heartbeat. "He's watching you." Who is watching me?" I cried, tears of fear and frustration welling in my eyes. There was no answer. Only the static, and underneath it, a new sound, a soft, rhythmic sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Like fingernails being dragged slowly across a wooden surface. And then, I heard breathing, slow, deep, ragged breaths, so close and clear it sounded like the person was standing right next to me. I screamed and slammed the phone back into its cradle. I scrambled backwards, falling over the coffee table, my eyes darting wildly around the empty room. "He's watching you." The words echoed in my head. I had to get out. But where would I go? I was miles from anywhere, surrounded by darkness. My car was parked out in the detached barn. The thought of running out into that blackness was just as terrifying as staying inside. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the upstairs bedroom, the door locked, a heavy dresser pushed against it. I had the 2 cats with me, their warm bodies a small, insufficient comfort. I didn't sleep. I just listened, my ears straining for every sound, waiting for the crash of breaking glass or the splintering of a door. Dawn came, and with it, a fragile sense of relief. The night had passed without incident. I felt exhausted, but alive. I told myself it was over. It was a sick, twisted prank, and they had gotten their fun out of it. That day, I was meticulous. I rechecked every single lock. I found a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and kept it with me as I moved from room to room. When evening came, I locked everything down an hour before sunset. The heavy wooden shutters on the ground floor were latched. Doors were bolted. Windows were locked. The kitchen window was an old casement window with a hand crank and a small, stiff latch that you had to press down hard until it clicked. I closed it, cranked it tight, and pushed the latch down. Or, I thought I did. In my fear, I must not have pushed it hard enough. It didn't click. It was almost closed, almost locked. A millimeter of a gap. A fatal oversight. Around 11 p.m., the phone rang again. Same unknown number. I didn't answer. I just watched it, my hand gripping the iron poker, my knuckles white. It rang 10 times before falling silent. A few minutes later, I heard it. A faint sound from downstairs. A soft, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from the back of the house. From the kitchen. My blood ran cold. It was the sound from the phone. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I crept out of the living room, my feet silent on the old wooden floors. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, just outside the kitchen doorway, hidden in the shadows. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, right at the kitchen window. It was the sound of a fingernail tracing the edge of the window pane. Then the sound changed. It became a soft tap-tap, tapping on the glass. A gentle, almost polite sound that was somehow more terrifying than a violent crash. It was an invitation. Let me in. And then I heard a faint squeal of metal on metal. A low groan. He was testing the window. He was pushing it. My mind flashed to the latch. Did I lock it? Did I hear it click? The answer was a sickening, plunging no. A soft click echoed from the kitchen as the latch gave way. A gust of cold night air swept into the house, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something foul and metallic. The scratching stopped. Silence. He was inside. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. I bolted for the front door, my hands fumbling with the deadbolt and the chain. I burst out into the night, and ran faster than I have ever run in my life. Across the dark lawn, down the long gravel driveway towards the barn. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I could feel his unseen eyes on my back every step of the way. I reached my car, tore the door open, and locked myself inside. I drove away from that house, the tires spitting gravel, and I didn't stop until I saw the blessed, artificial lights of the next town. When my aunt and uncle got back, the police found the kitchen window wide open. On the linoleum floor, just below the sill, was a single large, muddy footprint. And nothing else. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was disturbed. He hadn't come for their things. He had come for me. I've never told anyone this story. Not a single soul. To speak it aloud feels like giving it power, like admitting to a crime I can't prove I committed. But I carry the weight of it every single day. I think I killed someone. Or, more accurately, I think I was the tool that someone else used to do it. It happened 15 years ago. I was in my early 20s, drowning in debt, working a miserable retail job where I was treated like furniture by customers and management alike. My life was a monotonous cycle of folding shirts and faking smiles, and I was desperate for anything else. That's when I saw the online ad. It was for a remote client support specialist. The company name was vague, just Veridian Solutions. But the ad promised flexible hours, work from home, and decent pay. It seemed like a lifeline. The entire hiring process was conducted over the phone and email. I never saw a single face. My main interview was with a man whose voice was unnervingly calm and professional, but also completely devoid of personality. He asked me a series of technical questions and assessed my problem-solving skills. I passed. A few days later, a package arrived. It wasn't a laptop or any official equipment. It was a cheap, generic headset and a thin, spiral-bound training manual. The manual was bizarre. It was filled with complex troubleshooting flowcharts for software I'd never heard of, but it was also peppered with strange, almost cult-like mantras about absolute client discretion and maintaining the integrity of the system. One section, highlighted in bold, read, "Curiosity is a breach of protocol. Your function is to resolve the ticket and disconnect. Nothing more." The training itself consisted of a series of one-on-one phone calls with different anonymous trainers. They would present me with hypothetical problems, and I would have to talk them through the solutions in the manual. They were cold, efficient, and deflected any personal questions I had about the company. "That information is not relevant to your function," was the standard reply. Red flags were going up everywhere, but I was desperate. The money was real. It appeared in my bank account after my first week of training. So, I ignored the flags. I told myself it was just a weird, secretive tech startup. My job was to take calls from clients who had issues with their software. It was mostly mundane stuff, password resets, installation errors. But occasionally, I'd get a Tier 3 issue, which meant I had to request permission for a remote desktop connection to fix the problem myself. That's how I met him. The call came in late on a Thursday night. The client's voice was ragged with stress. A man named Martin who was on the verge of panic. He said a critical program wasn't working, and he had a deadline that was going to ruin him if he couldn't fix it. He was abrupt, rude, and clearly terrified. After an hour of failed attempts to guide him, I initiated the Tier 3 protocol. "Sir, I'll need to request remote access to your machine to solve this," I said, reciting the line from my script. He was hesitant, arguing for a few minutes, but his desperation won. "Fine, just be quick," he snapped. A small window popped up on my screen, and suddenly, I was looking at his desktop. It was a mess of files and open windows, and it was immediately clear he wasn't just working on some corporate project. I saw folders labeled with names of banks, spreadsheets that looked like transaction logs, and encrypted chat windows. It felt illicit, dangerous. I remembered the line from the manual, "Curiosity is a breach of protocol," and tried to focus only on the malfunctioning program. As I worked, navigating his files, he stayed on the line, breathing heavily. He didn't speak, but I could feel his anxiety radiating through the phone. I felt like a trespasser, a digital burglar in a place I shouldn't be. The air in my own small apartment felt thick and heavy. I finally found the corrupted file, deleted it, reinstalled the driver, and the program flickered back to life. "It's working?" Martin said, his voice a mix of relief and suspicion. "You're done." He thanked me curtly and hung up before I could even finish my closing script. The remote connection severed. I sat back, my heart still beating fast. The call had left me feeling dirty, unsettled. A few days later, I received an automated email from Veridian Solutions. It was a formal notification. "Client Martin has reported a level 5 security breach following your remote session. All assets from his system have been compromised. Your access is suspended pending an internal review. Do not attempt to contact us. We will contact you." Panic seized me. A level 5 breach. Assets compromised. It sounded like something out of a spy movie. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I had only done my job. I immediately typed up a detailed response, explaining every step I took, asserting my innocence. I hit send. The email bounced back instantly. "Address not found." I tried calling my supervisor's number. The line was dead. I tried the main support number I used for training. Dead. I went to the website where I'd first seen the ad. The page was gone. 404 error. Veridian Solutions had vanished. It was as if the entire company, the trainers, the supervisors, the paychecks, had been a ghost. They had used me, and now they had cut me loose. A week later, I was watching the local news. It was mostly background noise until I heard a name that made me freeze. Martin. The news anchor was reporting that a local man, a freelance financial consultant named Martin, had been found dead in his home office. The police were calling the death suspicious, citing that there were no signs of forced entry. But the man's computer and all his hard drives had been professionally wiped, erased beyond recovery. They mentioned he was being investigated for connections to an offshore money laundering scheme. I felt the blood drain from my face. I dropped the remote, the security breach, the compromised assets, the wiped computer. I hadn't just fixed a program for him that night. I had been the key. My remote connection must have been a Trojan horse, a backdoor that Veridian Solutions, whatever they really were, used to get inside his system. They waited for me to fix his problem and gain his trust. And then, once I was out, they moved in. They took everything he had, and then they silenced him. I went to the police. What could I say? That I worked for a ghost company that hired me over the phone and paid me to be a pawn in what was likely a corporate espionage hit. They would think I was crazy, or worse, an accomplice. I had no proof, no names, no faces. All I had was a cheap headset and a terrifying certainty. I've lived with that certainty for 15 years. I quit that line of work immediately. I live a very quiet, very low-tech life now. But sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that man's panicked breathing over the phone. I was the last person he trusted. I was the one who opened the door. And I have to live with the fact that my desperation for a better life might have cost a man his.